Right, guess what's finally arrived? So I check this page every day and it's finally here, right? Super Slam has been added to the Collector Center here on FABTCG, and that's fantastic because that means we can go through it and we can use the concrete pull rates rather than, taking a stab at it using everyone's collective pulling over the course of the release. But I do also think it is fair of me to point out that these are getting further and further away from the actual release of the set. So High Seas was a little ways out, and High Seas was definitely a lot more important and relevant, right? Because it had the treasure pack information. But even when it comes to Super Sim, there was a huge shift in the product design, right? We got super rares back, the expansion slot was heavily increased, and pull rates across the board were tweaked. So this page is definitely really, really interesting and insightful when going through all that. So for it to be, a month and 2 weeks out from the release date of Super Slam, it's a little bit of a shame. So I'm hoping it's just LSS had a lot on their plates and, eventually we'll return to form where we get the set, probably a week out, right? We get the actual collector's page, and then we can have some proper fun breaking it down. But nonetheless, we will dive into it and we will talk about the actual numbers declared here. So, like usual, right? All the good stuff is still kept secretive, and that's fantastic. I think that's definitely good for the game. So, for instance, even in Premium Foil, Rainbow Foil, the Fable is not noted, and Cold Foils are subjected to a combined rate, right? So, yeah, there's still some mystery there when it comes to pulling Marvels, pulling Cold Foils, which is just more incentive for this to be released, earlier. I think the only, devil advocate type of thinking I can say is they didn't want to show how much they basically just flooded super rares, right? Because, super rares were a few dollars, then a couple dollars for the good ones, and now they're at the point where they are kind of worthless because, as stated here, they are very, very easy to pull. So, yeah, overall, we have the Majestics properly broken down now, which is fantastic because it's the first set where we got a proper declaration of the expansion slot. So, even back in Bright Lights, we got the expansion slot as a whole, but not the expansion slot Majestics, right? Ferndale Spring Tunic was in there and it got a little bit muddled. So, to see the expansion slot at 1 in 6 for its Majestics, and the actual set to be 1 at 8 is wonderful. This is just the type of breakdown that I want to see. Then, again, for super rares, 1 in 2.18, but you can then add on the foil to that as well, right? So super rare foils, 1 in 13. So you are getting a ton of these a box, right? Not as many as rares, of course, but still a ton of them. So yeah, goes rares, then a little bump up, super rares, and then mainly there for the limited experience, and then the usual good stuff of your normal Majestics, although again, they have definitely been reined in, and, should hopefully not be as scarce, and that's great for the accessibility and for the reprints that they have pushed in Super Sam. So aside from that, when it comes to the actual card details, short printing is still not really declared, right? We have a somewhat core understanding of it when it comes to, equipment or anything with a legendary keyword, but, it's not directly stated anymore like it was in the first few sets, but that's fine. We can work around that. So yeah, let's dive into the numbers and see what we can understand. Right, so for the sake of this breakdown, I am not using any theoretical things, right? So I'm not taking into account short printing, although again, there's that understanding for the golden set and the expanded slots, and snag is definitely thought to be underprinted. I'm not factoring that in because again, it's not directly stated by LSS, and when we initially do this sort of breakdown, I like it to be, a bit more concrete and actually use the numbers that are provided. Now, similar to that though, we do have, for instance, the handful of Majestics and even the expansion slot cards that only appear as non-foil and then cold foil. So they are taken out of the rainbow foils. So for instance, for our expansion slot Majestics over on the right, we have 24 non-foil and then only 12 rainbow foil. So similarly, for the limited Majestics, there's 14 overall, but only 9 rainbow foil because of the ones upshifted to cold foil with the micro or extended art treatment. Now, in terms of pull rates, right, so we're told the non-foil and the rainbow foil, so that's fantastic. Now, when it comes to the rainbow foil, for Majestics is declared at 1 in 22, so I've gone ahead and broken that up so that we can see the actual pull rate, so that we can gauge the estimated pull rate for limited Majestic Rainbow Foil cards and expansion slot Rainbow Foil cards. So for limited Majestics, 1 in 51, and expansion slot 1 in 39 roughly, right? And again, overall, that adds up to 1 in 22. So you're getting about 1 to 2 Rainbow Foil Majestics a box, but you're still getting a lot of the other stuff. So yeah, overall, when it comes to a specific pull rate, so again, trying to find a specific card, and that is definitely relevant because there are some really nice cards. For super rares, to find a specific card because of the size of the pull, it's 1 in 87. For a rainbow foil super rare, it's 1 in 468. So yeah, looking just directly overall between super rares and Majestics, rainbow foils are still hard to get, right? Even super rare rainbow foils. So although the market doesn't appreciate them, maybe one day there will be a proper premium on rainbow foils. But as it stands, right, it basically just gets compounded onto the pull rates of, the non-foil version, so that we're just thinking about in terms of accessibility across the board. So aside from that, I suppose it is worth mentioning rares, right? Non-foils are 1 in 0.7 packs, and then a rainbow foil is 1 in 6. So there is a little bit of a retreat there, obviously, because they're funneling in super rares, but then again, the actual card pool for rares is smaller than what we'd normally see in, the most recent sets. Now, when it comes to combining the pull rate, so again, just finding a super rare or a majestic, super rares come out at 1 in 1.87. So roughly every 2 packs, you will find a super rare, be it non-foil or rainbow foil. So again, they are very, very commonplace. So that might have been the rationale that, again, there wanted to be some level of sellability to the super rares for when Super Slam first came out, but again, they have definitely dropped off and they will stay dropped off. As for the Majestics, limited Majestics, there are Majestics core to the actual heroes in the set. 1 in a 6.97 or 1 in 7 packs, right? So you're looking at roughly 3 to 4 a box. Expense Slot Majestics, 1 in 5.19, so about 4 to 5-ish, right? So overall, that is still a ton of Majestics. That's slightly above previous sets, right? So Majestics still are a little bit more commonplace overall when it comes to Super Slam. Now, in terms of collecting a total playset or having a total playset available for the market, so to speak, a total playset of the Super Rares amounts to 120 cards, for Limited Majestics 42, and 64 for the Expansion Slot Majestics. So this means going off of, again, that combined pull rate, essentially it would take 224 packs for there to be a playset of all super rares available within the market, right? So for every 224 packs opened by the community, there is one whole set of super rares. For Limited Majestics, 291, and for Expanse Slot Majestics, 332. And again, I like looking at this in terms of a collective perspective, because that's basically what we do, right? We open and we disperse the cards and everything evens out in the end, right? So converting that to boxes, so again, 24 packs in a box, 9 boxes for super rares, 12 boxes for Limited Majestics, and around 14 for Expand Slot, which then convert to cases. 2.5-ish cases for super rares, 3 cases for your Limited Majestics, and 3.5 cases for your Expand Slot Majestics. And that is definitely a lower number than I personally expected, right? If we compare it to Welcome to Rathe, it has definitely declined. So yeah, overall, it's nice on one hand to see that Fab is in a easier to collect place than it has been over the plethora of previous years. But it is still sort of questionable whether this is an anomaly or this is sort of what we can expect going forward. When it comes to our rares, you should theoretically get a full playset within a case, right? Granted, again, there will be a lot more variability to that than your super rares or majestics or anything like that, because again, there's just a lot more variation going on there. But overall, right, unlike Mastery Pack Guardian, rares have not been super adversely affected by how this set has been designed in terms of the addition of super rares. Now, the big one that a lot of people probably care about most, how does it compare when it comes to the reprint? So we have Felling the Crown, Plow Under, and Snag. We also do have the Legendary Equipment, New Horizon, and Flick Knives, but they are a little bit more questionable, right? We'll touch on them shortly, but for Felling the Crown and Plow Under, when it came to Rosetta, to specifically find either of them, right? Not one of each, right? But to find a copy of Felling or a copy of Plow Under, be 1 in 142 packs. That means roughly 1 every 1.5 cases. Now, similarly for Snag in Kloo, it works out to roughly the same amount as well, right? 1 Snag in 1.5 cases. So comparing that to Super Slam, we definitely do have a little bit of a reprieve. Granted, again, the general thought is that Snag is underprinted. But when it comes to Felling and Plow, it is definitely a lot more commonplace, and you should be getting one of them around every case of a Super Slam. So yeah, that definitely relieved a lot of the pressure when it came to those two cards and the price they had pre-Super Slam. So now, to touch on the legendaries, it gets a little bit more complicated, because for Super Slam, we have the Rainbow Foil rate declared at 1 in 94. Right? Now, the question is, does that include the non-foil variant or the lower rarity variant of Flick Knives and New Horizon, as the Rainbow Foil was an extended art and definitely a lot harder to pull than that? So going off of that number, the next question then is the print size of Super Slam, because comparing it to Tales of Aria, you had 6 legendaries at 1 in 88. So specifically New Horizon would be about 1 in 528 versus Super Slam, where it should be around 1 in 470. So definitely a bit more commonplace. And if we're at a heightened state of a print run, then, there should be more of them in circulation than from Tails. But again, Tails you have to combine, first edition and unlimited, and there was quite a lot. And then when it comes to Outsiders, well, although the Rainbow Fall variance is more commonplace, so there was 5 legendaries in Outsiders, and a Rainbow Fall was 1 in 70, we most likely have a smaller print run of Outsiders when compared to Super Slam. So overall, they should probably even out, and there's obviously just enough of them to relieve a little bit of pressure, but still make them decent cards, especially in their higher rarities. So, I would say job well done when it comes to these reprints at the legendary level, but to some extent it's also kind of easier to get equipment right, and balancing them since, it's just 1 copy to specific classes versus a generic Majestic where 3 copies may be played, or, a bit more of a specific Majestic for XYZ class. Now, to compare it through a little bit of the spectrum of Flesh and Blood, we have Welcome to Rathe, and then High Seas as the previous set, and now Super Slam. So, in terms of cases per playset, it would take roughly 3.75 cases of Welcome to Rathe to supply a full playset of the Majestics and Super Rares of that set. For High Seas, it took 5 cases, so that's quite the jump over the course of, several years. And then Super Slam, again, just a nice reprieve, where we've dropped back down to 3.5, so less than Welcome to Rathe, That is definitely nice to see, but, maybe there's also that question of, was it a overcorrection, Would it be better to sit slightly above Welcome to Rathe overall, given with how far the game's grown in terms of, again, having those various different areas to pursue when it comes to, classes and heroes and what everyone wants to play. And then for limited Majestic pull rates, 1 in 12 for Welcome to Rathe, but again, the card pool was significantly smaller versus that of High Seas or Super Slam. For High Seas, 1 in 5.88, and then Super Slam has been pushed to that 1 in 8, but again, the card pool has then been reduced. So overall, while it is an increase to what we've seen with Majestics throughout, the most recent sets, it's still fair, Because again, that card pool size has been drastically reduced, with a lot of Majestics obviously fitting the expand slot rather than the limited slot of the set. Then for the expand slot, we had 1 in 12.5 for High Seas, and now 1 in 6 for Super Slam. So that, again, just directly reflects the card pool size of that respective slot. Now, in terms of the super rare pull rates, for Welcome to Rathe, 1 in 6, and then Super Slam at 1 in 2.2. So yeah, that is a drastic change, even with the difference in card pool size, Super rares are just immensely pullable when it comes to Super Slam. Now, if we look at it through the lens of a comparable print size, so we're looking at copies of a given card per 100,000 print run, So while we expect High Seas and Super Slam to be, higher than that, Again, this is just for comparative sake to try and understand how much of, certain play pieces LSS are actually printing. So at 100,000 boxes, mind you, So 2.4 million packs, you'd get around 20,000 copies of any given Majestic in Welcome to Rathe, 12,400 copies for High Seas, and then 24,800-ish for Super Slam. So yeah, High Seas reflects, again, most recent sets. So that was quite the difference where even though the print size has been increased, we weren't getting comparable counts of cards in terms of the community growth, But once again, Super Slam has drastically reverted to what we've seen through, again, Welcome to Rathe and Arcane Rising, offering a good supply of Majestics. And that, of course, is reflected as well in the expense slot at 19,000, around 300 copies of a expense slot Majestic per 100,000 boxes printed for Super Slam versus only 17,580 for High Seas. Now, when it comes to super rares, Welcome to Rathe offered around 26,700 copies of each super rare per, again, 100,000 boxes, and then Super Slam has increased that again despite the increased card pool size of Super Slam super rares. So 32,000 copies of each super rare, roughly. Then for legendaries, per 100,000, you'd have around 5,000 copies of each legendary for Welcome to Rathe, 4,200-ish for High Seas, and then 5,100 for Super Slam. So again, that is also a nice return, making legendaries a little bit more commonplace, but I don't think legendaries were as much an issue as Majestics have grown to be over the course of the last few sets. Now, when it comes to these legendaries, again, we're only really looking at the lower rarity, so, that's again, rainbow foil or non-foil, depending on whether or not it is a reprint. With that in mind, again, overall, Super Slam has just made everything a lot more accessible and essentially reined in the escalation that we've seen over the course, again, of those past few sets when it comes to Flesh and Blood across both Majestics, well, super rares since they've been reintroduced, and of course, legendary. So definitely nice to see. But again, the question is, do you think it's an overcorrection? Do you think this was just a little bit too high of a tweak and we want it, again, pull back just a little bit, some sort of sweet spot between the most recent sets from Rosetta through to High Seas, right? Since they've been, some of the more difficult sets in terms of both print supply and then also card populations? Or do you actually want to just see this continue, right? And try to have the value pushed again to the Rainbow Falls that seem to be grossly underestimated, given again the rate from a standard version to a Rainbow Fall version. Overall, what's your happy median? Let me know. Other than that, hope you enjoyed. Yeah.